today's session to get it online. Okay, we are recording now. All right, so going back to the cinematic orchestra, the piece is called Cinematic Orchestra. The piece is called Flight. The band is called Cinematic Orchestra, and you can put that as the composers. You don't have to list every individual composer on that if you don't want to. Did you guys find a year that it came out initially? 2002 was when that song first came out. Cinematic Orchestra is a jazz fusion group that's been around for a little while. Their music's really nice, relaxing. Like if you need something to listen to at night or while you're studying or something, they're a good group to do that for. I like them a lot. Good. So some of the instruments we saw some drums, some guitars, some keyboards. What about the big instrument? What was that one? Do what? It is not a cello. It is a bass. That's correct, Destiny. Thank you. It is an upright bass. So we're going to talk about the instruments of the orchestra next week. So you'll get that down there. But it's a bass or a double bass or an upright bass. They all kind of have the same name. It's like a big cello. If they're standing up while they're playing it, then you probably can guess that it's a bass. And in most jazz groups, they're going to have a bass rather than a cello. All right. So, but again, do your best guesses on those. These are more just to kind of get you engaged and get you going for the day. Any other questions about the day listening today? The era for something like this, it's going to be like 21st century. So it came out in 2002 originally. So it's a 21st century or a modern era is fine. The era, you'll see that more pay attention for things like if it's the Gregorian chant, we'll talk about the Middle Ages or the Renaissance era. Yes?
So we're not going to count off if we miss an instrument or two?
No. That's fine. These are, I go through, I read them just to kind of see what your responses are, but these are pretty much just if you made an attempt and put a legitimate answer in there, then you're going to get credit for it. Okay. Get your 5 points for the day in there. All right, good questions. Thank you. Okay, so like I said, today we're actually going to start in on the content of this class. Just to remind you, you can find the PowerPoint that I'm going over in course materials under Part 1. The PowerPoint is right there. It says Part 1 PowerPoint. That is a link to a document in my SharePoint in my OneDrive. So what that means is that instead of opening up the actual file, you're going to be linked to the file on the web. That allows me to make updates. Like this morning, I went in and added a couple of things that'll make a little more sense for the folks that are online. Instead of having to write stuff on the board, I just added it to the PowerPoint. So that way you can kind of refresh it every day and see some of the new stuff that I put in there. Okay. Now, it would also be in your best interest, whether you're online or not. I see that Jade finally made it in. Whether you're online or not, to go ahead and click on assignment 1. I read through all of these questions this morning, and pretty much everything that's on there we're going to talk about today. Okay. Now, I did notice that this one got a little bit out of order from the chapter, so if you've already started working on that, you may have found that out, but it should be pretty obvious. It's all within Chapter 1, and Chapter 1's pretty short. So you should be able to find it. There's some questions about pitch that ended up a little bit further down, but you know that we talked about pitch up early on. Yes?
What if my book's still on back order?
If your book's still on back order, you should still be able to do the assignments based on the PowerPoint, and they should have those in pretty soon. Assignments aren't actually due for another couple of weeks, so by the time you get the books in, you should be fine. But I would go ahead and have the assignment open, read through the questions, and that way you can go ahead and click on some answers as I'm talking about them. You can always save it and come back to it later. Yes?
You can also get the Kindle app on your computer and get it on Kindle on your phone.
You can do that. I'm not allowed to tell you that, but yes, you can do what she said. Yes?
When I did the assessments, filled out about 3 of them. So if I missed any questions on it, I just retook it, and it tells you what the right answer was that you got wrong. So
yes.
You can always do it and guess, and then go back and get the correct answers, and then put them in as correct answers.
That is another great idea. So for those of you that are online that can't hear what the class is saying, somebody suggested that what she was able to do was get on Amazon and get the book on Kindle, the digital book on Kindle. You said it was, what, $35? So it's about the same price as the bookstore book, but you've got it available digitally, and you can open it up in the Kindle app either on a device or I think there's a Kindle app for the web, right, where you can open up Kindle books there too. And then somebody else also suggested, as I mentioned on Friday, that when you complete one of these assignments, when you hit submit, it pulls up a page that has all of the right answers on it. So you can print that to a PDF or print it out and go back and do it again and get those right answers there. So those of you that don't have a book yet, that kind of gives you a way to go ahead and get going on these. But like I said, I'm also going to go over this stuff. Pretty much everything that's in the assignments, I'm going to talk about during my lectures. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get rolling here then. We are going to start off with chapter 1, and before we talk about anything else in music, we have to understand what music is. And we have to kind of define some terms. We have to lay out some groundwork. I actually had a student call me, one of my web students called me last night, and she was trying to do one of the listening assignments, and she said, I don't even know what these words mean. I was like, well, that's where we're getting started. Okay, well, this first chapter gives you some of these terms and it'll give you an idea of what we're talking about here. We'll also do, if we have time today, we'll actually do listening assignment 1.1 together in class, or we'll do it on Monday if we run out of time. We're a little bit flexible. We're actually starting a day earlier than I was planning on, so we're a little bit flexible with time. Okay. This introduction is basically just kind of giving you a background, giving you a little bit of kind of an overall introduction. I'm not going to spend too much time on this stuff. One of the things I do like to point out is background listening versus active listening. Basically what that means is most of you, whenever you're listening to music, it's just kind of background noise to you. You're in your car or you're studying, so you've got the lo-fi YouTube channel on in the background or whatever, and it's just kind of background noise for you. That's just background listening. You're not really paying attention to what's going on there. There's a second level up from that, which some of you that are more into music may experience, and that's where you're really listening to the music for a purpose. And that can be anywhere between, going to church and getting into the music at church, or listening to music to help kind of get through a situation, or to help with your emotional side, something like that. And that's more active listening, that you're really paying attention to the music for the emotional value of it, but you're not necessarily getting into the technical aspects of the music. And then we have what's called perceptive listening, which takes that up to the next level. That perceptive listening means that you're not just listening to it actively. You're not just, oh, that's a cool beat, oh, that's a nice groove, oh, it's a happy song or a sad song. You're listening to more of those technical instruments, like we did in our technical aspects, I should say. Like we did in our daily listening, things like pointing out what the instruments are that you're hearing, thinking about when was this written, what is the venue? Is this a live performance? Are they improvising, or is this something that was written out ahead of time? Taking into account the historical context and the social context behind what's around. There's a lot of music out there right now that's coming out over the last year or so having to do with some of the social issues that are going on in the United States. And taking that into consideration while you're listening to the music enhances that experience. It helps you to know a little bit more about it, and sometimes you'll discover that you enjoy the music even more if you really know what's going on with it. Another aspect of that is also not just knowing what the composer, what the person that wrote the song was going for, but what it means to you. Deeply analyzing the words and thinking about it, and if it's a song that has some kind of deeper meaning, what is that meaning for you? What is it about those lyrics that draw you to it? How does that apply to your personal life? And really kind of digging through some of that stuff. It can actually be pretty therapeutic in a way. Now, that doesn't work for every song. If you're listening to Booty, 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 Rockin' Everywhere, that's not going to have a deep, significant meaning to you, probably, unless you enjoy being at the club and shaking your rump. But, whatever. Most songs that you really connect to, if it's beyond just I like to dance to it, it's a happy, fun song, then there's probably some kind of deeper connection. I would venture to guess that everybody that's here or joining us online can think of a song that has a deeper meaning for you. It reminds you of, a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a dog or a grandparent or something. When I was teaching high school students, I used to have them do a project where they presented a song that had a deeper meaning for you, and it was usually a really easy project for them because everybody has that. This one song takes me back to this one place. It reminds me of 5th grade whenever I had this friend and they moved or whatever. So everybody's got that kind of emotional tie to it. So it's a good idea to really explore that and to pay attention to it, and that's kind of what this class is teaching you, along with giving you the history of music. We are going to talk about the history of music. We're going to go back to about 400 AD, and we're going to talk about 1,500 years of music that got us to where we are today. We're going to talk about the development of the first time people started singing, and then the first time people added a second line to what they were singing, and how all of that stuff developed over the centuries. Bringing all that stuff together basically gives us a deeper appreciation of music, and that's really the point of this course. Okay, as I've said before, I don't expect you to like everything that you listen to in this class. Just because we study Gregorian chant does not mean that you're going to suddenly enjoy Gregorian chant and you're going to load it up on your iPod and listen to Gregorian chant every day. But you'll at least understand that this was where music came from. We wouldn't have T-Swift if it hadn't been for Hildegard von Bingen singing Gregorian chant back in the 6th century. Actually, I think she was more the 12th century, but you get the drift. Okay, but first we have to start with the technical aspects of sound and music. What makes up music and how does sound exist? We're going to kind of turn this into a science class for a little bit. Music is, of course, an art. There is an art to it, but then there is also a science and there's math involved as well to kind of explain why music works the way it does. And we're going to kind of touch the surface on that. I'm a music theory nerd. I love music theory. I took every music theory class I could in college. I taught AP music theory for about 6 years, and I loved it. So I could talk this stuff forever. I have tried to force myself to limit what I'm going into because you guys really don't care about all the deep, crazy aspects. But there's a lot of stuff there that's really interesting when you really start to dig into it. Okay? So where does sound come from? First off, we need to understand that sound can be pleasant or unpleasant. It can be something you enjoy listening to, or it can be something that's harsh. Music can have the same effect. It can be a pleasant kind of music, or it can be a harsh kind of music. How many of you remember the movie The Dark Knight? The famous Heath Ledger as Joker. Every time you saw Heath Ledger as Joker, Hans Zimmer did something brilliant with the musical soundtrack. He had the sound that was, I think he ended up using like a razor blade on a cello string to create this really eerie sound. And it was unpleasant and it made you uncomfortable and it kind of got you into that mentality. You could almost feel the Joker's psychosis through the music there. It was very effective, but it was very unpleasant. But then we also have, the Twin Sons theme, as they call it in Star Wars, bum, bum, ba, da, da, dee, da, that you all have heard 1,000 times. You hear it in all of the movies, and it's a very pleasant, happy-sounding theme. We use some specific words there that we'll talk more about later. If a sound is pleasant, we say that it is consonant. And if it's unpleasant, we say that it's dissonant. You've probably heard the word dissonant before, but you may not have necessarily heard the opposite of that, which is consonant. So you'll hear me talk about that some, and these terms will show up in the book and in our PowerPoint later on. We have the ability to focus in on specific sounds as humans. We have the ability to drown out specific sounds. So while I'm talking, your brain naturally focuses in on that and kind of ignores all of the other stuff that's going on. Some of us do that better than others. Some of us are, like me, are easily distracted by the crinkling of a water bottle or somebody shifting their book around. Or you may not even notice until I go completely silent that the air conditioner's blowing and it's actually making a sound. If we stop and listen for a minute, all of a sudden, all of that other noise comes into the forefront, right? You start to hear the buzz of this speaker has a little bit of a hum to it. There's a fan inside of the projector that has a little bit of a hum to it. The air conditioner is blowing and that has a little bit of a hum. And then of course, all the little micro movements that you hear, you know, people shifting in their seats and adjusting and typing, you start to hear all that stuff. So that's something that humans do pretty well. Obviously, other animals can do it as well. We just don't know as much about it because we can't talk to them. I wish we could. Do you guys wish you could talk to your dogs? I wish I could talk to my dog. I'm kind of glad, though, that my dog doesn't talk to other people because he'd probably tell all of the world what a weirdo I am. This man sings to me all day long. It's crazy. Okay, anyway. All right, so sound starts as the result of something vibrating. Something is causing the air to vibrate, and that air is then kind of pulsating and making its way into your eardrum and is then converted into what we perceive as sound. And we can actually analyze that. Now, our brain does all of that for us. We don't have to think about the frequency and the amplitude and all of that stuff. But to understand sound a little bit more, we can get into that. We can analyze it and kind of have an idea. So that's sort of what we're going to talk about here. We're going to break sound into 4 categories or 4 elements that make up sound. Okay? And specifically musical sounds. All right? So musical sounds have 4 elements. Those are pitch, dynamics, tone color, and duration. That's a test question, by the way. If you've got the assignment open up, it's somewhere down a little bit lower. You can go find that one. Okay, so pitch, dynamics, tone color, and duration. All right, and we're going to talk about each of those in depth, except for duration. We don't really need to talk about duration in depth because it's a pretty simple concept. What does duration mean? Length. Yeah, exactly. How long it is. Right, that's all duration means. We don't really need to spend any time going into detail about that. Now, when we talk about rhythm, we'll get into some specifics of duration and how it relates to time and all of that stuff. But for right now, duration is just how long the sound is. Okay? Well, we're going to look at these first 3 things in a little bit more detail. The pitch of a sound is how high or low the sound is. It's how high or low we perceive the sound. Now I'm going to crank this piano. I've got a piano in class here for those of you that are joining us online. It may be a little bit loud for you guys, but I want to make sure they can hear it. So a low sound would be down there. A high sound will be down there. That is a difference in pitch. So what causes those to be different? How is the sound wave itself actually different? Well, that has to do with the way the sound wave is vibrating, how fast or how slow it's vibrating. Okay? A faster vibration is going to result in a higher pitch. A slower vibration is going to result in a lower pitch. Usually, smaller objects are going to vibrate a lot faster than bigger objects. You can think about a pipe organ. How many of you have ever seen a pipe organ in person, right? It's pretty obvious which notes are coming out of which pipes on those pipe organ because the little bitty pipes are going to be really high-pitched sounds. If you take a straw and you blow through it, the resulting vibration is a high-pitched sound. But if you took a big PVC pipe and blew air through it, you're going to get a lower-pitched sound. Generally, that's how that works. Now, there are some other properties that come into play, but for the most part, if you're looking at musical instruments, you can guess that the bigger instruments are going to be the lower pitched instruments. If you take a bass guitar versus a regular electric guitar is a little bit smaller. The strings are shorter and wound a little bit tighter, so they're going to have a higher frequency, as opposed to a mandolin, which is even smaller, is going to have a higher pitch, a higher frequency. Okay? Once we give when we say that a pitch has a tone, becomes a tone, that means that pitch has a definite frequency. A tone is a sound with a definite pitch. It has a pitch that we can analyze and figure out the exact frequency that that is vibrating at. Okay? For instance, the note A4, which is right there, the exact pitch of that we have decided in the musical world, most of us agree on it. You'll find 1,000 YouTube videos about whether it should be 440 or 432, but who cares? For the most part, we agree that 440 kilohertz, 440 hertz is the note A4. It's the A below middle C. Okay? Sorry, the A above middle C. I gave you the wrong line. That's A4. That's 220. Middle C, which is the C right in the middle of the keyboard, is 261.6 hertz. Okay, well, how do we find that? I'm going to come back to this slide in a second, but I want to flip over to this one. You can analyze a sound frequency and actually look at the sound wave. We have devices that are called oscilloscopes that you send a sound into it, and it shows you the frequency. It shows you the wave. Now, we have to zoom way in to be able to actually see what this looks like. Okay? So we measure, when we're measuring pitch, we're actually measuring the length between these peaks. How many of those peaks do we have within 1 second? So when you see hertz, Hz, that is cycles per second. And there's a lot of stuff that's measured in hertz, right? If you're a PC gamer, you're all about having the higher hertz on your PC screen. I think 300 hertz are what a lot of the new screens are coming out with. On your cell phones, most kind of average cell phones are a 60 hertz refresh rate. 90 hertz has become kind of the standard, and then the fancier phones have 120 hertz refresh rate. That just means that it refreshes that many times per second. So 60 hertz is 60 times 60 cycles per second. When we look at sound waves, we're looking at how many of these peaks happen every second. How fast is it vibrating? Okay? Now, again, we're going to zoom way in. So if we didn't zoom way in, if we said this period of time on the top one, if this period of time across this line is 1 second, how many peaks do we have in that 1 second? 3. So what would we say that the frequency is? 3 hertz. Now that's way beyond the level of human hearing. That's way lower than what we can hear. So we're going to pretend like we're zoomed in a little bit. We're going to say that this line is 1/100th of a second. Okay, if this line was 1/100th of a second, then what would the frequency of that be? 300 hertz. Exactly. 300 hertz, if we quantized it to match the notes that we like, 300 hertz would be about right there. Would be about the note D. Now that's actually closer to like 310 hertz, but for ease of math, we'll just call it 300 hertz. Make sense? Okay, if this bottom one, if again that line is 1/100th of a second, then what would the frequency of this bottom line be? 600 hertz. Okay, how are those related? Mathematically, what's the ratio there? Yeah, the bottom, exactly. The bottom one is moving twice as fast as the top one. So which one do you think is going to have a higher pitch? The bottom one, the higher frequency that's going twice as fast. 300 hertz on the top, 600 hertz on the bottom. And there's actually an exact ratio there. We call that an octave. If you double or halve the frequency, you get a new octave. So I said about 300 hertz, gives us the note D4. So 600 hertz would be 1 octave up, meaning we go up 12 semitones. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And we got to the note D, 1 octave higher. So 300 hertz, 600 hertz. And they happen to sound really good when we play them together. They blend almost perfectly. Okay? Our A that we talked about is A440, which is that A. So if we wanted to find an octave lower than A4, what would the hertz be? What would the frequency be?
220.
220. So if I go down, that's 220. If I go down another octave,
110.
we get to 110. If I go down another octave, we get to 55. And that actually works infinitely. Now, we get beyond our range of hearing pretty quickly. Okay? The same way go in the other direction. If we start at 440 and we want to figure out what the frequency is an octave higher, what's that frequency?
880.
880. Where does it go from there?
1760.
Is that right? I don't know. I'm terrible at math. Something like that. Okay? And you can go up from there. So you have that exact doubling in the frequency. So the lower pitches are going to have a lower frequency. The higher pitches are going to have a higher frequency. And we can actually look at every single note that we can hear, that we can perceive on any instrument, and we can determine what the frequency, what the main frequency hearing in that note is. Now, there are sub-frequencies that we call harmonics that change from instrument to instrument what kind of tone you're hearing. That all depends on the other frequencies that are present within that sound wave. We're going to talk about that a little bit later when we talk about tone color. Okay? Oh, a term that I skipped over. The octave that we talked about, that is an example of an interval. An interval is just the distance between two notes. We can play any two notes and we have an interval there. Now, you don't have to memorize any other intervals other than what an octave is. An octave between two notes means that you're going from one letter name to the same letter name, but it has a different pitch. Okay? All right, when we talk about pitch range, we're talking about the distance between the lowest and highest note that a voice or an instrument can produce. All of our instruments have a pitch range. This piano that I have in my classroom, the lowest pitch is down there, which is an A, and that's, I think, 27.5 hertz, all the way up to this C, which is barely even perceptible. Okay, has a pretty big range. That's one of the benefits of the modern piano. Vocally, people have a range, and we tend to divide people up by what their range is whenever we're placing you in a choir. Okay, so I've got some kind of common ranges here. The flute range ranges commonly from C4, from that middle C. Some flutes actually have a B key, so they can go one lower. From that C up to C7, which is 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's the range of kind of the average flute. Now, with most musical instruments that are wind-blown, brass instruments and woodwind instruments, the range is really what you can do with it. People have figured out how to make flutes sound even higher by pushing down weird key combinations and stuff. But the average, your high school flute player can play from C4 to C7, which is from 261 hertz to about 2 kilohertz. Okay, so that would be 2,000 hertz for kilohertz. My vocal range, I am a bass baritone, so my vocal range is from D2, depending on how early in the morning it is especially, to about F4, okay? Let's see, it's early in I've been talking a lot this week. Do, re, mi, fa. That's about as high as I can get, comfortably. Sometimes I can get up to that G, but you don't want to hear me start squeaking that out. It's not pleasant at all. Okay, so that's just kind of where my range falls. I'm a bass baritone. Brendan Urie, you guys familiar with who that is? The lead singer from Panic at the Disco? He is known for having a pretty astounding vocal range. He is also, I'm not a huge fan of Panic at the Disco. I do like their music a little bit, but that guy is probably the best rock and roll singer out there right now, alive. His range is huge. He has about a 5-octave range. From what I've been able to find on the internet, he can sing from my lowest note up another like 2.5 octaves above where I can sing. Now, he's utilizing a falsetto range up there, which all of us have a falsetto range. You just have to figure out how to get to it. I don't use mine very often, so it's not developed. He does. So he has a really nice, well-developed range. Have you guys heard the Panic at the Disco version of Into the Unknown from Frozen 2? It's amazing, right? He does a better job of singing that song than Idina Menzel does. But most of the time, he's up in his falsetto range, which means that you're kind of breaking into the upper part of your voice. So if I go... That's my falsetto range. And as you can tell, it's not very pleasant. That's one of those dissonant sounds that I was talking about earlier, because I don't have that developed. So that falsetto range for Brendan Urie is hugely developed, and he can get way up there to these high Cs, which is insane. Okay, we're not going to worry about the online piano. So that's pitch. Any questions about pitch? What does pitch relate to? What scientific unit of measurement? Hertz, or frequency. Okay, if you can remember those three things, pitch, frequency, and hertz all go together. Okay, we measure the pitch of something is measured by its frequency, which is measured by hertz, which is cycles per second. Okay, humans can hear from about 20 hertz to about 20,000 hertz. That's the kind of average human hearing. Mine's a lot worse than that because I played in a lot of rock bands when I was young. Okay, so let's talk about dynamics. Dynamics in a piece of music are the relative loudness or softness of the sound, and it's all relative. Okay, so when you see these dynamic terms, these Italian terms, there's not an exact way to measure that. Okay, it's all relative to where you're starting, what the average loudness is for the general sound that you're hearing, the atmosphere or whatever. Okay, so this is related to the amplitude of the vibration of the sound wave. I'm going to go back to our sound wave here. Find it. Where did I put my sound wave? There it is. The amplitude of a sound is measured by measuring from high peak to low peak. So this is the amplitude. Okay? Can you guys see that? So that is the amplitude. If that were closer together, if it was a shorter wave that looked like that, then that would be a softer sound. It would have a lower amplitude. Make sense? Changes in dynamics can be either sudden or gradual, and we'll talk about the terms there. And then also we have what is called an accent. This is another test question, by the way, on the assignments there. An accent is where you put an emphasis on a certain note. You give it a certain accent. We do this when we're speaking. We tend to accent the important words of the sentence, right? If you ask somebody, what are you having for lunch today? You're almost always going to accent the word lunch because that's the most important part of the sentence, right? Lunch is always the most important part of the sentence. Okay, that term accent applies to music. If I'm going bum 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 bum, those louder notes are the accented notes. Even if I'm just playing a steady stream of notes, in a lot of action movies, you hear this kind of jump 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 kind of rhythm, pulsating rhythm, and it's those accents that give it that specific rhythm. They're emphasizing specific notes to give it that groove or that rhythm. The last thing I want to talk about today is the Italian terms that we use to indicate dynamics. You do need to become familiar with these because I'm going to ask you, about these. Okay, when we talk about the different pieces in the listening assignments, it'll say, you know, what is the dynamic level of this piece, or what do you think the dynamic level of this piece is? And again, it's all relative. You know, it could be, if it's loud, it could be forte or fortissimo. Right? So piano means soft, forte means loud, and then we just add extra letters to those. If it's two P's, that's pianissimo, which means very soft. If it's two F's, that's fortissimo, which means very loud. If we put an M in front of it, excuse me, that M stands for mezzo, which means moderately or medium. So mezzo piano is kind of soft. Mezzo forte is kind of loud, right? So if you were going to put these in order from softest to loudest, it would go pianissimo, piano, mezzo piano, mezzo forte, forte, and then fortissimo from softest to loudest. You don't have to worry about forte piano and sforzando, but these two words down at the bottom are also on the assignment and on the test. A crescendo means that you are gradually getting louder. Okay, and when we look at sheet music, you'll see that a crescendo is on the bottom, and a way to think about it is that the music that's on the right side of the crescendo is louder, it's greater than the music that's on the left side of the piano, the sheet music. The opposite of a crescendo is a diminuendo. You do also sometimes hear the term decrescendo, but diminuendo is actually the official musical term there. Okay? I think that's it with dynamics. We'll talk about tone color and do a listening assignment together on Monday. Sorry, guys. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. If you have any questions in the chat, there were a couple of you that were late. If you will, go ahead and just type in the chat. I came in late so that I can get you added to the attendance. You're okay.
All right, so if I